is Paul Jackson, and he's going to be talking about changing the world one conversation at a time. Paul, over to you.
Thank you very much, and welcome to the cabaret. Oh, that was yesterday. John? His holiday photos are very nice, but not much help to me as a timer. Good. So, the call comes in. Would you like to do a TED Talk? Moments of excitement. Who's heard of TED Talks? Wow, yes. So they've become very popular. They were set up by a guy called Chris Anderson. And when I was a young journalist, I was talking to a guy called Chris Anderson, who was a trainee journalist on the same newspaper. And he was a quiet, intelligent bloke, but didn't seem to stand out from the crowd of people in the newsroom. And I left the newspaper, he left the newspaper, and 15 years later, I met Chris Anderson again. We were both flying kites on my local playing fields in Bath. And it was the same Chris Anderson, and his children were the same age as my children, going to the same school. And he'd set up a company, a publishing company called Future. And he sold that company a couple of years later for £60 million. We'll come to that in a moment. He moved to America, and the secret of his success as a publisher of magazines was to give things away free on the cover. Discs and software and so forth. He was the first one to do that. So he found what worked, and he moved to America, and he bought TED, and he did it again. He found what worked, so he gave away TED Talks, some of the top talks in the world by the best speakers in the world. You can watch free online at any time. So finding what works and doing it twice from the humble beginnings of a journalist. So the invitation comes in to give a TED Talk, and I say, yes, I will do that. A TEDx Talk, which is one of the ones that's a satellite event, this one being in Russell Square in London. And I thought I'd share with you my 5 top tips for a TED Talk. So, tip number 1, you choose your topic. Yeah, you've come for some wisdom, it will be there. Choose your topic. And TED is all about changing the world through these talks on education, technology and design. And Solution Focus is about changing the world. So I chose the topic of changing the world one conversation at a time. And I decided I wanted to talk about, of course, Solutions Focus. Now, tip number 2. You ready for this one? Tip number 2, if you watch all the good TED Talks, the best TED Talks, they have one central theme. They're about one thing. So if you were to pick one thing that you were going to talk about in relation to Solution Focus, which aspect would you choose? What would your key point be? Shout a few out. Strengths. It's a very tempting topic, isn't it, that people know about strengths and they're going to enjoy hearing about strengths. Ask. The Italian cafe chain. Yes. Ask the audience about things. You could do that, but unfortunately these TED Talks, they're not keen on them being interactive. It has to be a presentation. So asking the audience is quite a tricky thing to do. The other ideas? Clues. Thank you, Sherlock. Clues suggestion. You could talk about clues and Steve DeShazer. I thought the central thing that I wanted to talk about was the distinction between problem talk and solutions talk. Because when you talk to people about solutions focused, they say, of course I'm solutions focused. Who wouldn't be? It seems very natural and obvious. So I wanted to illustrate this difference between problem talk and solution talk. So I started like this. I said, wouldn't it be strange if you went shopping with a list of all the things that you didn't want to buy? People agreed that would be odd. Or if someone came up to you and said, No, I don't want a cup of coffee. What do we know about what they do want? Very little. They may want a glass of water, a cup of tea, or perhaps something completely different, like going for a walk. So you wouldn't ask them, tell me more about this cup of coffee that you don't want, would you? It would be curious. And yet, when you work as a consultant or as a coach, people always want you to talk more about the poor leadership they're experiencing in their company, or the way that the team isn't working very well, or when they're in coaching, what their deficits are and weaknesses are as a chief executive. These poor performances, bad teamwork and weaknesses that they don't want. And it seems sensible to talk about them. So those are all examples of problem talk. Now, problem talk can be useful. It has its place if you've got a mechanical issue or a roof needs fixing, and it's the same as all the other mechanical issues in the roofs. They can be fixed by analysing the problem and then fixing it. So you don't, if you, for example, go into a garage with a flat tyre on your car, you don't want the mechanic saying to you, tell me about a time when your tyre was working well. Should be irritating, pretty irritating. So problem talk has its place, but some of the best conversations that people have, the ones that do change the world, one conversation at a time, tend to be solutions talk. Solutions talk is about what you want to have happen, maybe a picture or an image or a description of what that would be like, what your strengths are, so we touched on strengths, your good experiences, your resources, and what you might expect to happen next, signs of progress. So this was going to be the central theme. Tip number 3 for a TED Talk, and John, your time has gone completely blank now, so it's of little use. Luckily I set my own timer on here. Ooh, 2 hours and 14 minutes still to go. Excellent. Feels like that, yes. Thank you, hecklers. We're up to tip number 3. Yes, tip number 3 is you tell a personal story. You have to share a personal story. So this was okay for me with Solutions Focus. I have a strong personal connection. I trained with Steve DeShazer and Insoo Kim Berg. I co-founded Sol, which has had 11 wonderful conferences, international conferences, plus the satellite conferences. I co-wrote 2 books about Solutions Focus, one with Mark, one with Janine, and it's led me to all sorts of extraordinary places. I've spoken about Solutions Focus in an Austrian palace, in a Japanese cellar, and in a hot tub in Austria. Some of you saw the photo yesterday. So good, strong personal connection. And you can tell some of your favourite stories about the topic as well. I chose a couple of stories. One that I really like about Steve DeShazer, who was consulting with a man who'd been for many consultations with other psychiatrists and doctors about his heavy drinking, alcoholic so-called. And the first psychiatrist had analysed the problem, but it didn't do anything to stop his drinking. And the second doctor told him about the liver damage and the brain damage, very frightening, but did nothing to stop the drinking. And he went to see Steve DeShazer, and Steve started the session, as he often did, by saying, tell me, what is it that you do with your days? And the man said, well, I spend my days listening to music and drinking. And Steve said, what sort of music? This led to a conversation about his enjoyment of music, his hobby. He liked playing in a band, air guitar, and possibilities of change and progress through his strength, his passion, the thing that he enjoyed, the music. And I told a second story, which came from the work of Bjorn and Eva, when they were working with Kraft, one of the very few controlled studies that shows how successful Solutions Focus is as an approach within organisations. Very rare. There's only controlled studies on what happens in organisations at all, so Solutions Focus coming out well was no surprise. The story I liked was about persistent underperformance. Bob, the man who had to look after the machine that date stamped the cheese. So a Kraft factory, they make processed cheese, and there's machines that date stamp it. And Bob was not very good at his job. And the machine would break down or go wrong, or be stamping the wrong dates, and Bob would let it run. and this was very irritating to his supervisors and managers, and it was an expensive loss of production because they couldn't sell this cheese with the wrong dates on it. And they thought they'd tried everything. So they had warnings. It was very difficult to sack him because the union was strong and you'd have the cost of recruitment. And they put up notices, and they'd given Bob his appraisal interview, but Bob didn't seem very interested. Luckily, this manager had been learning solution-focused coaching and thought he could try something different. So next time the machine went wrong, he watched Bob carefully, and Bob watched the machine, and Bob did nothing. Eventually, he stopped the machine. Supervisor came and said, Bob, thank you very much for stopping the machine then. If you'd let that run any further, we'd have lost a lot more cheese, and that would have been very bad for the plant. So thanks, well done. Bob looked a little bit puzzled. Life went on, and the machine went wrong again a few days later. And this time, Bob stopped it a little bit sooner than he had previously. The supervisor came up and said, "That's great, Bob, thanks very much. How did you know to do that?" And Bob said, "Well, you can hear the machine when it's going wrong. It sounds different. The engine's not the same." And next time, he stopped it faster. And within a couple of weeks, Bob would become a fascinated expert on keeping this machine absolutely meticulously running. And this was one example of how solution-focused coaching spread throughout the plant. And this plant outperformed the identical craft plant that had not had solutions focus across the way. So that's the fourth tip, your favourite stories. And the fifth tip for a TED Talk is a call to action. You have to leave the audience inspired with a call to action. So I suggested that they might like to use a solutions talk approach rather than a problem talk approach next time they had a conversation that mattered to them. And I gave 3 tips that they could do for that. And the first tip was to focus on what's wanted rather than what's not wanted. So if somebody is telling you what they don't want, you could say to them, "So I guess you don't want that. What do you want instead?" This was one of Insu's classic questions. What do you want instead? What is it that you want? And even this can keep conversation onto a solutions talk track. And the second tip was to focus on what's working. What's going well? And if it's a challenge or a struggle, then what's going well even a little bit is worth discovering, talking about, finding out, and expanding on. And the third tip was to look for what's next, for signs of progress. So if you had a challenge, difficult problem or issue to deal with, how would you know that things were improving? What would tell you that you were making progress? Again, even a bit, small signs of success. So that the call to action was to look for what's working, what's wanted, and what's next. And I think the call for action here for us at Sol is to remember that Sol's been going only for 10, 11 years. We're still very new, very young, very small. You are all pioneers. And it's possible for all of us to go out there and change the world, one conversation at a time. Thank you.